You ever feel like the woods are holding their breath, just waiting for you to cross a line? That's what I felt the moment I stepped off the trail in eastern Tennessee. I've told this story 100 times, and not once the same way. Not because I'm lying, but because some things about that week still don't make sense. The truth is, I went into those mountains thinking I knew the land. What I didn't realize was the land knew me better. It was October 2013. I remember the exact date. I left because it was the weekend before Halloween and my coworkers had all given me hell about going hiking alone. I worked for a local newspaper in Knoxville at the time. The pay was garbage, but I liked the quiet. That's what I was after when I packed my gear and headed for the Cherokee National Forest. I wanted solitude. I wanted silence. I wanted a break from headlines about drunk drivers and local politics. I got all of that and more. I started my hike at the base of a trailhead near the Tellico River. The air was cool, the sky overcast but calm. Leaves had started to fall, carpeting the forest floor in burnt orange and dull yellow. I had 7 days mapped out with food, water, filtration, my pack, knife, flint, a compact tent, and a backup phone battery. I had done solo hikes before, even longer ones. I wasn't worried. The first 2 days were uneventful, peaceful even. I passed 2 older couples on the first day, and one guy with a heavy pack and a beard down to his chest who nodded and kept walking. Past that, it was just me and the forest. I didn't even bring a Bluetooth speaker. I wanted to hear everything. Birds, branches breaking, water moving across rocks. The stillness out there has a kind of music to it that no one back in town understands. On the 3rd day, I made a mistake. I veered off the main trail to look for a spot near a stream I remembered camping at with my uncle as a kid. He'd taken me fishing there when I was maybe 10 or 11. I couldn't remember the exact route, but I felt confident I could find it. I followed the slope of the terrain down into a ravine thick with moss and ferns, then climbed out toward a dry ridge I didn't recognize. By the time I realized I'd gotten turned around, the sun had started to dip behind the trees. I told myself not to panic. I still had daylight, and my GPS tracker could help me reroute. I pulled it out and flipped it on. No signal. I took out my phone. Nothing. No bars. Not even a blip of satellite contact. That wasn't unusual out there, but something about the dead silence put me on edge. The woods had changed. Not the trees, not the path beneath my boots, but the feeling in the air. Everything had gone quiet. No rustle of squirrels, no birdsong, just the whisper of wind in the branches and my own breath. I set up camp in a clearing near a tree split down the middle by lightning. It looked old, charred black in the center, with one half still standing and the other rotting where it had fallen. I made a small fire, boiled water from a nearby stream, and tried to relax. I told myself I'd retrace my steps in the morning and rejoin the trail. It wasn't the first time I'd gotten a little off course. Around 1 in the morning, I woke to the sound of footsteps. Not animal, not the scurry of deer or raccoon. These were heavy, measured, human. I reached for my knife and sat still inside the tent. The footsteps circled once, twice, slow and steady, like someone was checking me out. I called out, "Hey, who's there?" My voice cracked and vanished into the trees. No answer. The steps stopped. I unzipped the tent just enough to look out, but there was nothing. Just the fire, still faintly glowing, and the dark woods beyond. When I finally stepped out with my knife in hand, I found No tracks, no broken twigs, no signs anyone had been near. But about 10 feet from my tent was something I'll never forget. Carved into the bark of a pine tree were symbols I couldn't identify. They looked almost like stick figures with antlers or branches coming out of their heads, 5 of them side by side, some taller than others. One had a circle carved where the head should be, like a face or sun. They were fresh. Sap was still seeping from the cuts. I took a picture with my phone, then backed away and packed everything. I didn't care that it was still dark. I didn't care that I had no GPS signal. I needed to get out of there. I started walking north, using the stars and the slope of the land to guide me. The Appalachian Trail isn't flat. You can use elevation to find your way if you know what you're doing. I thought I did. I hiked until dawn, never once stopping, constantly checking behind me. I felt eyes on my back the whole time, not like a bear or a mountain lion. I've seen both in the wild. This was different. This felt intelligent. I kept thinking about those symbols, about what they meant, who had carved them, why they were so precise. Sometime around 8 in the morning, I reached a rocky outcrop with a view that stretched for miles. I saw mist clinging to the valleys below and what looked like an old cabin ruin on a distant slope. I marked the direction and started down, thinking maybe someone lived there. Maybe I could get help, or at least figure out where the hell I was. I reached the ruins by mid-afternoon. It wasn't a cabin, not exactly. It was the foundation of what had once been a large homestead. Stone walls still stood in places, and the outline of a chimney loomed over the rubble. I found a rusted axe head buried in the dirt, and something that looked like a metal jaw trap, the kind used for wolves or bears. Both had been left untouched for decades, but someone had been there recently. In the center of the ruins was a pile of stones shaped like a cairn, balanced, not stacked. On top of it sat a single crow skull, cleaned white. I didn't stay long. By sundown, I had put 5 more miles between me and the ruins. I camped again, this time without a fire. I kept my knife in hand, my eyes on the dark, and I listened. Nothing. The woods didn't make a sound. Even the crickets were silent. That night, I woke to whispering. Not just one voice, multiple, men and women. Some sounded far away, others right next to my ear. I ripped open the tent and shined my flashlight around in a full circle. Trees, shadows, no people. I kept the light moving, then froze. At the edge of the clearing, maybe 30 feet away, stood something. Not a man, not a woman. I couldn't tell what it was. Tall, thin. Its limbs looked wrong, longer than they should have been. It didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood watching me. I backed into my tent and stayed up until dawn, knife clenched tight in my hand. When morning came, it was gone. No tracks, no scent, just silence. I walked for 12 hours straight, ignoring my feet, my thirst, my aching back. Around 6 in the evening, I stumbled onto an old service road. It ran down a hill and into a small ranger outpost built from logs. I banged on the door until someone answered. A man in his late 50s, with thick gray hair and a scar across his chin, opened up and stared at me. "You been off trail?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, almost crying. "I got lost." He nodded slowly, then stepped aside. "Come in, we'll get you some water." Inside, I told him everything. I didn't care if I sounded crazy. I told him about the symbols, the voices, the figure in the woods. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. There are places in these mountains, he said, where things don't want to be found. You probably wandered into one of them. I asked him what he meant, but he wouldn't say more. He called another ranger on the radio, and within the hour, they drove me back to my car at the original trailhead. No questions, no report, just a nod and a warning. Don't come back alone, he said, if you come back at all. When I got home, I went to show my brother the photo of the carvings on the tree, but the image was gone. The folder was empty. Every other picture on my phone was still there, just that one was missing. I've tried to rationalize it. I've tried to find that spot again on maps and satellite images, but nothing matches what I saw. The symbols, the ruin, the figure in the dark. None of it makes sense, but I still dream about it. I hear the whispers when I'm alone, watching, waiting, silent as ever. And I know this. Whatever was out there in those mountains, it let me leave, but it never let me go. Story 2. I was born in McDowell County, West Virginia. Folks around here don't spook easy. The mountains are quiet, and the people are quieter. You hear stories now and again, old folk tales about haints, watchers, and curses buried deep in hollers where no roads ever been paved. Most of it's superstition, just stories passed down to keep kids from wandering too far off. At least, that's what I thought, until I saw it for myself. In 2007, I was 22 and working odd jobs, painting, fixing decks, laying tile. That summer, I picked up work from an older man named Dale Withers. He was in his 70s, retired coal miner with a busted hip and a house that needed repairs. His place was tucked away near Panther State Forest, miles off the main highway, where the blacktop turns to gravel and then disappears completely. Dale was paying cash and letting me stay in a trailer out back while I worked. I figured I'd be there a week or two, tops. Dale wasn't much for company. He didn't talk unless you asked him something. Even then, his answers were short. The first night I stayed, he brought me a plate of beans and cornbread, set it down, and said, just turned and limped back toward the house. I laughed at first, figured he was just one of those old-timers who liked his privacy. I nodded and went back to eating, but I couldn't shake the way he said it. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning. On my third night there, I finished painting the front porch just before dusk. The air was heavy, smelled like rain, but never came. I sat outside with a beer, watching the tree line. It was quiet, too quiet. Not a single bird, not a chirp or flutter, just the stillness of air and branches that refused to move. I started to feel uneasy, like the woods were watching me. I stood up to head inside when I heard a sound I'll never forget, a scream, high-pitched, ragged. It started like a woman in pain and twisted into something inhuman. The hair on my neck stood up. I turned toward the main house, but the lights were off, curtains drawn, no movement. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the ridge. I just wanted a look, I told myself. Too dark for that time of day. I clicked on the flashlight and stepped off the path. The beam cut through the trees in narrow cones of light. Everything else stayed black. I walked maybe 200 yards before I noticed something strange. The forest floor was wrong. Small trees bent in odd angles. The trail curved into a small ravine, and that's when I saw it. Something was standing in the creek bed. My light hit it just enough to see its shape, tall, maybe 7 feet. It was facing away from me, but I could tell its limbs weren't right. They were too long, too thin, like arms made of rope. Its skin, or whatever covered it, looked stretched, pale, and rubbery, like it had been peeled from something else. The thing twitched, and its head turned sideways, far too far. I didn't wait to see its face. I ran. I must have sprinted the whole way, because my legs were shaking and my throat was raw when I slammed the door shut and locked it. I stayed awake all night, sitting on the floor with a hammer in one hand and my flashlight in the other. I didn't hear the scream again, but I swear I heard footsteps outside the trailer just before dawn. Soft, careful, measured. The next morning, I confronted Dale. I told him what I saw and asked him what the hell was out there. He didn't seem surprised, just poured himself a coffee and sat at the table. "You went past the ridge, didn't you?" he asked. I nodded. He sipped his coffee, then said, "I told you not to." I pressed him, asked him again and again. Finally, he spoke. "My daddy used to call it a watcher," said. Story 3. The mountain took my brother. That's the only way I can say it. No search and rescue team ever found a body. No animal prints. No signs of a struggle. Just one moment he was there, and the next he was gone. And no matter what anyone says, I know what I saw in those woods that night. I know something in the Appalachian Mountains took him. This happened in the fall of 1998. I was 16. My brother Isaac was 18. Our dad had taken us up into the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia every year since we were kids. Hunting, fishing, camping. It was our tradition. That year was different though. Dad had passed away from a heart attack the winter before, and Isaac insisted we go back up one last time for Dad. Mom wasn't thrilled, but she let us go, thinking it might help us deal with the grief. We left just after school on a Friday afternoon and drove Dad's old truck up through Richwood and deep into the backcountry. The forest was already glowing with fall color, orange and red and amber like fire rolling over the hills. We camped near a ridge our dad had loved, a spot where the pines broke just enough to see the mountains stretch for miles. There were no other campers out there. No rangers, no roads within 3 miles, just us and the silence of the hills. The first 2 nights went by like normal. We fished in the stream, hunted for rabbit, cooked bacon over a fire, and told dumb stories about school and girls. Isaac was always the brave one. I remember he laughed when I asked if we should bring a rifle instead of just bows. What do you think is gonna get us? A black bear with a grudge. On the 3rd night, everything changed. It was cold, clear, and quiet. Too quiet. The crickets that had sung us to sleep were gone. The wind had stilled. Even the fire seemed like it burned without sound. Around midnight, Isaac shook me awake. I remember how pale his face looked in the moonlight. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I sat up and listened. At first, I didn't hear anything. Then it came again, this low, groaning sound, like a tree bending too far in the wind, only it didn't match the wind at all. It was too steady, almost rhythmic. Then it changed. It turned into this long, drawn-out whine that raised the hairs on my arms. Isaac grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside the tent. I followed, not wanting to be alone. We scanned the woods, light bouncing off trees and brush. Nothing. Then we heard it again, closer. This time it sounded like a voice, a woman's voice, soft and slow, saying something we couldn't understand. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I'd ever heard. Just this gentle, whispering chant coming from the tree line. Isaac pointed the light toward the sound and called out, "Hello, you all right out there?" The voice stopped. We stood there, barely breathing. Then something moved. It was fast. too fast for a person. 1 second, it was on the left side of the clearing. The next, it was behind us. The flashlight couldn't catch it, just shadows and brush swaying as something moved between the trees. "We're leaving," Isaac said. We grabbed our boots and whatever we could carry and started walking down the trail, heading back toward the truck. The moon lit the path enough for us to see without the flashlight. I don't know how far we got, maybe a quarter mile. That's when the air changed. Everything went still. No wind, no sound, no movement. Isaac stopped walking. "Do you hear that?" I was about to say I didn't hear anything when the voice came again. Only now it was right behind us. No footsteps, no rustling, just a voice whispering in a tongue I didn't understand, barely above a breath, like it was speaking inside my head. We turned to run. I remember Isaac pushing me forward, yelling at me to go. I tripped and slid down the slope of the hill, tumbling hard into the mud. I heard him behind me, his footsteps crunching the leaves. Then, silence. I called his name. No answer. I climbed back up the hill, flashlight shaking in my hand, screaming for him. I searched for hours. Nothing. No prints. No broken branches. It was like the mountain swallowed him. Eventually, I found our trail again and ran all the way to the truck. I drove into town, covered in mud and blood from a gash on my knee, and called the police. They searched for days. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers, not a single trace. They said he probably got disoriented and fell, maybe into a ravine or off a cliff, but that doesn't explain the voice, or how fast the thing moved, or how nothing, not one shred of him, was ever found. Mom never blamed me, but I blamed myself. I still do. I've been back once, 20 years later, just to stand at the edge of that ridge again, just to say I'm sorry. And when I got there, do you know what I saw? A stone, a single flat stone, placed carefully in the dirt where our tent once sat. Carved into it was a word, or maybe a name, something I couldn't read, letters I'd never seen, but they looked familiar in the way a bad dream feels familiar. I left and haven't gone back, but sometimes I still hear the whisper in the wind, in the quiet moments before sleep, calling my name. Story 4. I was found crawling barefoot through the woods at 4 in the morning, my hands torn up, face covered in scratches, blood dried to the sides of my neck. I was 29 years old and had just bought a small cabin in western North Carolina, deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. No one could figure out what happened. Not the sheriff, not the hospital, not me. But I remember, not all of it, not the beginning, but I remember enough. I remember the moment everything went wrong. I remember the silence in those trees, the burning in my throat when I tried to scream, and the eyes I saw staring back at me in the firelight. It started in May 2015. I had just gotten divorced. No kids, no mortgage, just a failed marriage and a need to get away from the city. I had always dreamed of living off the grid, writing, building, breathing clean mountain air. When I found the listing online for a cabin about 2 hours west of Asheville, I jumped on it. The place was old but sturdy, tucked into the side of a slope with no neighbors for miles. The nearest town had one gas station, one church, and a diner that closed by 6. It was perfect. The first few weeks were exactly what I needed. Mornings with coffee on the porch, evenings with a book by the fireplace. I started chopping my own wood, put up new fencing where the rails had rotted, repaired the old well pump. I had no cell reception and no internet, just a radio and an old landline. Isolation had never felt so good. That changed on the night of June 4th. I had stayed up late that night, writing by lamplight. Around midnight, I heard a knock on the cabin wall, not the door, the wall. 3 hard, deliberate knocks on the side of the house closest to my bedroom. I froze, listening. No wind, no rain, no branches moving, just the soft creak of the wood around me. I stepped outside with a flashlight. Nothing, not a sound. I circled the cabin, light in one hand, splitting axe in the other. I saw no footprints, no movement, but I did smell something strange. Wet dirt, like freshly dug soil. It hung in the air, thick and sour. I went back inside and locked every door and window. Slept with the axe beside my bed. The next day I found prints in the garden. Bare human feet. They circled the back of the cabin and stopped at the wall where I'd heard the knocking. The prints were deep, spaced strangely far apart, and led into the forest where they vanished into soft moss. I took pictures, then rubbed them out with a rake, trying to convince myself it was just a prank. But it wasn't. That night, I lit a fire outside and stayed up, watching the trees. The air was still, heavy with tension. Around 2 in the morning, the wind picked up suddenly and carried with it a sound I can't explain. A voice, high-pitched and distant. It called my name. I stood up slowly. The voice came again, this time closer. I stepped to the edge of the tree line, flashlight off, just staring into the dark. Then I saw them, eyes, a dozen pairs, low to the ground, reflecting the firelight. They blinked in unison, not fast, not afraid, just blinking. Then they rose, one by one, the eyes lifted higher, until they stood well above my height, easily over 7 feet tall. I should have run. I should have screamed, but something held me still. My legs locked. My voice died in my throat. I felt like a puppet with all its strings pulled tight. Then the fire went out. I don't remember much after that. Not until I was already crawling through the woods, bleeding, gasping for air. No shoes, no idea which direction I was heading. The next clear memory is headlights in the distance, and a man shouting, "Jesus Christ, are you all right?" They took me to the hospital in Brevard. My fingernails were torn and full of dirt. My lips were cracked and dry. I had a deep cut along my shoulder that looked like it had been stitched clumsily with something sharp. No one could explain how I'd gotten there, or why I didn't remember anything. When I was released, I went back to the cabin during the day to collect my things. The inside was wrecked, furniture overturned, dishes broken, all the drawers pulled out. On the far wall, carved deep into the wood, was a spiral pattern, not painted, carved over and over. Dozens of spirals, all cut into the wall with something sharp. No sign of forced entry, no tracks, just the spirals. I sold the place for half what I paid and moved back to civilization. Years later, I heard a story at a bar in Asheville. A man who grew up in the same part of the mountains told me about something the old people used to warn him about. They called them the Silent Ones, said they lived between the trees, only came out when the woods fell quiet, said they didn't kill you, not always, sometimes they just watched. Other times, they took something from you and put something else in its place. When he asked why I looked so pale, I told him what happened to me. He just nodded. They don't forget, he said, and if they touched you, you're already marked. I've had nightmares ever since, of being trapped underground, of spirals carved into skin, of fire that won't stay lit, but because sometimes when I walk by, I catch something standing behind me that vanishes when I turn around. Whatever followed me from that mountain, it didn't stay in the cabin. It came home with me. Story 5. The thing about the mountains is, once you're in deep enough, your voice doesn't go anywhere. You can scream until your lungs tear open and no one will hear a thing. That's what happened to me in the summer of 2001. I was 19, working trail maintenance with a seasonal crew in a remote part of the George Washington National Forest. The area we were in bordered parts of the Virginia-West Virginia state line, dense with ridges that folded in on themselves like a cracked green sea. Our job was to clear blocked trails, reroute water drainage, and keep markers fresh. It was dirty work, but good, paid well, and I loved being out there. There were 5 of us on our crew: me, Lewis, Dave, Elena, and our supervisor, Troy. We were all around the same age, except Troy, who was pushing 40 and treated us like we were fresh out of diapers. He'd been working the backcountry for over 15 years and had a sixth sense about the woods. Could look at the sky and tell if a storm was coming. Could walk us to an exact spot without needing a map. He'd also give us weird rules sometimes. Stuff like, never whistle after dark, or, don't step over a single line of stones if you didn't lay them yourself. At first we thought he was just superstitious, but he said them with such seriousness, none of us dared test him. One evening, near the end of July, we were camping at a site about 10 miles from the nearest access road. We had spent the day clearing an old, overgrown trail that hadn't been used in years. According to Troy, it had once led to a fire lookout tower, long since torn down. As we worked, Lewis found something in the brush, a rusted metal sign, half buried. He pulled it out and wiped the dirt away. It was bent but readable. In faded red paint, it said, "Do not return. Let them lay." We joked about it, of course. Alina said it sounded like the name of a metal band. Dave carried it around like a trophy, tucked under his arm as we finished the day's work. Troy didn't laugh. He looked at the sign once, real quiet, then told Dave to put it back where he found it. Dave refused, said he wanted to hang it in his dorm back at college. That night, the woods went silent. We all noticed it. Around the campfire, no one said it out loud, but we all knew something felt off. The usual chirping of crickets and distant hoots of owls had vanished. Even the breeze had stopped. Just this still, almost hollow quiet that made your ears ring. That's when we heard something snap in the trees. We all froze. Troy stood up slowly and whispered, "Put the sign back." Dave, trying to play it cool, laughed and said, "You're kidding, right?" Troy didn't answer. He was staring into the woods behind our tents. "Now," he said. Dave rolled his eyes, walked toward the edge of the brush, and tossed the sign down. It landed with a metallic thud. None of us spoke for the rest of the night. Later, after we had all turned in, I woke to someone walking around outside my tent. I figured it was Troy doing his usual patrol, so I unzipped the flap and peeked out. That wasn't Troy. Whoever it was stood on the other side of the fire pit, barely visible in the dying glow of the coals. They were tall, too tall, with arms that reached down past the knees. Their back was to me, but I could see their head tilting slowly, side to side, like a dog listening to a sound too far to hear. Then I noticed something worse. The figure didn't cast a shadow. I ducked back inside my tent, heart pounding, and didn't move again until the sun rose. I didn't even sleep. just kept my eyes locked on the zipper and prayed for daylight. In the morning, we all knew something was wrong. Louis looked like he hadn't slept. Alina said she heard breathing outside her tent. When we all turned to Troy, expecting an explanation, he just said, "Pack up now." We hiked out in silence. No breakfast, no small talk, just boots on dirt and eyes scanning the trees. Dave walked slower than the rest of us, dragging his feet like he was dizzy. At one point, he stopped and mumbled something none of us could hear. Troy walked back to him and grabbed his arm. That's when Dave started screaming. He dropped to his knees and clutched his head, shouting, "Make it stop, make it stop." He thrashed in the grass, scraping his hands across the ground like he was trying to dig into the earth. Blood poured from his nose. Troy pinned him down and told us to stay back. I had never seen anything like it. His eyes rolled back, mouth open, body jerking like he was being electrocuted. After 20 minutes, he passed out. We carried him the rest of the way to the access road, where we radioed for help. A ranger truck met us there and took him to a clinic an hour away. When we asked for updates later, we were told he had suffered a psychotic break, but that didn't explain what he mumbled in the days that followed. Said they whispered from the trees, told him things, asked him to come back. He kept repeating one phrase in his sleep over and over again. "Let them lay, let them lay, let them lay." I never went back to trail work after that season. None of us did. Even Troy disappeared, quit the parks department and left town. Last I heard, he was living in a trailer down in Alabama, not far from the swamps, off-grid. I tried to forget it all, tell myself we were exhausted, stressed, maybe inhaled something weird from old chemicals or fungus in the woods. But sometimes I still hear the whisper, usually when I'm walking alone near the edge of a forest. A soft voice, low and quiet, asking me if I remember. I do, and I know now what that sign meant. There are things in the mountains that aren't meant to be disturbed. Let them lay. Story 6. The bones weren't human. At least, that's what I kept telling myself as I stood at the edge of the sinkhole, staring down at the bleached remains. But even as I said it in my head, I knew I was lying. They were small, maybe more than one. I found them while helping a volunteer team clean up debris after a late summer storm in 1996. The area was near the border of Tennessee and North Carolina, deep in a part of the Smokies most people don't know exists. No trails, no signage, just raw forest and an old fireline road that hadn't been used in decades. We were clearing fallen trees when I stepped off the edge of a shallow ridge and sank knee-deep into soft ground. It gave way under my weight, collapsing into a 6-foot drop that opened into a hollow pit. The others pulled me out quick, but I saw what was inside. A circle of bones, arranged neatly, precisely, with small wooden totems laid between them, each carved with symbols I didn't recognize. One of them had been burned on one side, and the char had left a mark in the dirt around it. The team leader, a man named Clay, peered into the hole and went pale. He told us to pack up and radio the forestry office, said we weren't authorized to dig any deeper. I assumed they'd call the authorities, but nothing ever came of it. A week later, I asked Clay if they figured out what the bones were. He looked at me without blinking and said, "That place was already marked. We shouldn't have been in there." After that, I couldn't get the image out of my head. I started researching local history, looking into old settler records, native legends, anything I could find. A friend at the library helped me dig up maps from the 1800s. That patch of forest had a name once, Tomb Hollow. No towns nearby, no cemeteries. He had gone missing. She said he left in the middle of the night. Left a note that simply said, "I have to go back." They found his truck parked along the old fire line road, engine cold, driver's door wide open. No footprints, no trail, just the woods, waiting. I've told myself 100 times that I shouldn't have, but I couldn't stop thinking about it, about what I saw, about the way Clay looked when he stared into that pit. I needed to see it again, just once, just to prove I hadn't imagined it. I hiked in alone, late in the afternoon. The forest was thicker than I remembered. The underbrush was strange. Every fern and root seemed off somehow, as if the whole forest had shifted slightly sideways. While no one was looking, I found the sinkhole, or at least the place it used to be. It had been filled in, not by the forestry team. No signs of machinery or tools, just earth, packed hard, too smooth, like something had buried it from underneath. I stood there for a long time, not sure what to do. Then I heard the sound. It was low, wet, like someone sucking in air through broken teeth. I turned and saw something moving between the trees, not walking, slithering, tall, hunched over, dragging its arms across the forest floor. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it had one. I could feel it staring at me. I ran. I don't remember the path, just the trees flying past, branches slicing my arms and face. I didn't stop until I reached the fire line road, legs shaking so bad I fell to my knees. The sun was already setting, and behind me, in the darkening woods, I heard a voice. It wasn't loud. It didn't growl. It just spoke, clearly, slowly, in a voice that sounded like a child imitating a grown man. You weren't supposed to see it. I didn't turn around. I got up, forced myself into a sprint, and didn't stop until I was back in my truck. The next day, I found scratches on the hood, thin lines that ran in a perfect spiral from the center outward. Something had touched the metal, something with claws. Since then, strange things have followed me. Doors opening in the night, lights flickering, dreams of standing in that forest, buried up to my neck, unable to move, while something circles me just outside the reach of the moonlight. I never spoke about it to anyone after that, not until now. They never found Clay, but sometimes I dream about him too. In the dream, he's smiling, only it's not his face anymore. Story 7. I don't go into caves anymore. It started with a documentary, some late-night show about forgotten cave systems in the Appalachian Mountains. It mentioned a region in southwest Virginia where hundreds of limestone caverns snake under the hills. Some mapped, most not. They said the oldest ones were carved by underground rivers long before people ever settled in the valleys above them. That same week, my cousin Travis called. He was planning a weekend trip and wanted me to join. Travis was always chasing something, whether it was girls, adrenaline, or new stories to brag about. This time, it was caves. He'd read about an unmarked entrance near a place called Devil's Pocket Hollow, a name that should have been enough to keep us away. But Travis said it was just a nickname, a local legend. We left early Saturday morning. Travis brought a friend named Micah, a quiet guy who carried too many knives and didn't say much. I brought headlamps, rope, water, and a backup GPS. None of us were experts, but we figured the cave would only go in a few hundred feet before tapering off. That's what we thought. The trailhead was barely marked, just an old rusted gate and a footpath swallowed by weeds. We hiked 2 miles in, and sure enough, found the entrance, a low mouth in the rock beneath a twisted bluff. It looked like a snarl frozen in stone. Cold air poured from it, carrying with it the stink of wet earth and something else, something stale, like rot that had long since dried. Travis went in first, laughing. Micah followed, silent. I paused at the mouth, shining my light in. The rock inside looked carved, not naturally. The walls were almost too smooth. The first 50 yards were narrow, but manageable. The light from the entrance faded quickly, leaving us in a tight, echoing corridor. The temperature dropped fast. I could see my breath, and my skin prickled. We kept moving, crouched low, winding deeper into the dark. About 100 feet in, we found the first chamber. It opened up suddenly. The ceiling stretched 20 feet high, and the floor dipped into a shallow pool of still water. The sound of dripping echoed all around us. We paused, catching our breath, and took some photos. Then Micah pointed to the far wall. At first, I didn't see it, but when I angled my headlamp just right, I noticed what he meant. Symbols carved into the rock, hundreds of them. Circles, jagged shapes, spiral patterns overlapping one another. Some looked like hands, not stenciled like ancient cave paintings, but pressed, as if something burned the outline of a hand into stone, with immense pressure and heat. I turned to Travis. "Did you know this was here?" He shook his head slowly. "I thought it was just an old mine shaft or something." Micah was already walking toward the carvings. He ran his fingers across them, then froze. "There's something behind the wall," he said. I asked what he meant. He stepped back and stared at a section of stone that looked different, not loose, not cracked, just ... hollow. He pressed his palm against it. Nothing happened. Then he turned and said, "We should go deeper." I wanted to leave. Every instinct in me screamed that we had gone far enough. I told Travis we should head back, maybe report what we found. Micah didn't. He took out one of his knives and began scraping at the wall. The sound was awful. Metal against stone, ringing and harsh. After a few strokes, a piece chipped away. Beneath the outer layer was a darker stone, smoother. Then the sound stopped. Not the knife, everything. No more dripping water, no echoes, no air. It was as if we had stepped into a vacuum. The cave had swallowed all sound. That's when we heard it. A breath, long, inhaling, deep inside the cave. Not human, not mechanical, just ... breath. As if the stone itself was alive and waking up. We ran. Travis bolted first, but the cave twisted. The path we took in didn't look the same. The walls had changed, narrowed. The stone felt warm under my hands. The air had thickened, smelled like rust and copper. I shouted for the others, but the silence returned. My voice died in my throat. I reached a bend and stopped. Micah was standing in front of me. He wasn't moving, just staring down a tunnel that hadn't been there before. At the end of it stood a figure, tall, thin, faceless. Its skin looked like stretched leather, wrapped over stone. It didn't move, but I could feel it pulling at something inside me, like gravity, like dread with weight. Micah walked toward it. I tried to grab him, but he turned and said something I'll never forget. "It's been waiting for us." Then he was gone, swallowed by the dark. Eventually, I saw light. I collapsed outside, gasping. Travis followed minutes later, soaked in mud and crying. We sat in silence for an hour before we moved again. We never found Micah. No search crew could locate the cave. When we returned a week later with rangers, the entrance was gone, sealed, as if the bluff had folded over it and closed. I don't know what we found, but it was awake, and it was hungry. I see a tunnel made of breathing stone and a handprint burned into the rock, still warm to the touch. Story 8. They say the woods behind Big Creek swallow sound. I never believed it until the night I heard my father scream, and no one but me even flinched. My father had lost his job at the foundry, and my mother had just started teaching part-time at a school nearly an hour away. The house was cheap, too cheap for how much land came with it. 20 acres of overgrown field, crumbling stone walls, and thick forest that ran up into the hills like a green wall. My father joked that we could get lost out there and not be found until spring. It wasn't a joke for long. The house was old, built in the early 1900s. Its floors sagged in places and the windows never quite shut right. There was a cellar out back, with a wooden door that always stayed locked with a rusted latch. My father didn't like that cellar. He said it was full of snakes and mold, but I saw the way he looked at it when he thought no one was watching, like it was holding something back. The sound came again, this time closer. I ran back to the house and told my father. Leaves swept aside in wide arcs, like something had been dragged. Don't walk the woods after dark. Not out here. Over the next month, it got worse. The house would shake at night, not violently, just a subtle shudder, as if something heavy was moving beneath it. Scratching sounds came from the cellar door, always just before sunrise. I'd wake to hear my father pacing the floor downstairs, whispering to himself. My mother started locking her bedroom door at night, though she never said why. Then, one morning, the cellar door was open. I found it swinging in the breeze just before dawn. The steps down into the darkness were slick with moisture, and the air coming up smelled of something sour and old. That night, he sat me down at the kitchen table and told me a story. He said when he was a boy, maybe 10 or 11, Hart. She had lost her husband in a mining accident and her only child to scarlet fever. After that, she changed. One winter, 3 children went missing from a nearby farm. Their tracks led into the woods and vanished. Search parties found bones, cracked open and clean, near one of the old mine entrances. Something that never stopped digging. I didn't sleep that night. A week later, I woke to screaming my father's voice from the woods. He was yelling my name. I saw the back door swinging open. My mother was gone. I grabbed the flashlight and raced outside, barefoot, cold air biting at my skin. I followed the sound of his voice into the trees. It was all around me, calling, begging. Then it stopped. I turned in a slow circle. The beam of my flashlight caught something on the ground ahead. A footprint, deep, bare toes, long and sharp, like claws. I dropped the light and ran. She didn't ask what happened, didn't speak to me for hours. When I asked where my father was, she said nothing. I haven't been back, but every year, on the first cold night of fall, I wake to a sound in my backyard, digging, slow, steady, like fingers in the dirt. Story 9. I should have never touched the stones. I told him I was looking for a trail near Brushy Knob, just off the Appalachian Trail, the kind that had been forgotten by time. He stared at me for a long moment and said only one thing: don't move the stones. Not a single one. I was a part-time photographer then, obsessed with forgotten places, ghost towns, abandoned shacks, old railroad tracks curling into the trees. An exaggeration told to keep the curious away. I set up camp halfway up the ridge, where the forest thickened into ancient trees, their trunks wrapped in moss and black lichen. There were no animal sounds, no birds, no bugs, just the wind weaving through the branches like it was carrying secrets from one hill to another. That night, they were arranged in a circle no wider than 10 feet across. In the center was one upright stone that stood taller than the others. It was dark, almost black, and humming. Not loud, not something you could hear with your ears. I counted 14 stones, all spaced evenly. I crouched down to get a better angle and noticed one of them was leaning too far inward. I reached out and nudged it gently, just enough to straighten it for the shot. I didn't notice at first. The shadows had moved. The air felt heavier. I looked back and saw that the stone I had touched was no longer leaning. It was standing straight, but the stone next to it had cracked down the center. I backed away slowly. That's when I heard the voice. It came from the trees behind me, soft, whistling at first, then forming words, like breath being pushed through teeth. You touched what was not yours. I turned and saw nothing. But the voice continued, now circling me. You were warned, and now you are marked. I ran. The woods shifted around me. The trail I had taken in was gone. My camp wasn't where I left it. I stumbled through briars and branches until I found a dry creek bed and followed it downhill, hoping it would lead to the road. Its bark peeled back like torn flesh, and each time I passed, it looked more decayed. I made a shelter under a fallen tree and tried to wait out the night, but I didn't sleep. All night, I heard whispers, feet crunching in leaves, hands brushing across the bark behind me, and eyes watching. By morning, the forest was too quiet. The wind had stopped. The air was thick, hot, like breath held too long. I climbed until I saw a ridge I didn't recognize, a slope of gray stone that cut through the trees like a scar. At the top was a figure, tall, still, wrapped in rags that moved without wind. Its head turned as I approached, though I still couldn't see its face. Behind it, the stone circle had returned, but it was different. Now there were 15 stones. One of them was wet, covered in moss that dripped red. I didn't move closer. I turned to run and found the forest behind me had changed again. My hands were covered in cuts I didn't remember getting. The gas station was closed. No one came out. My camera was beside me, cracked but intact. I opened it weeks later and checked the memory card. The photos were there, the stones, the circle, the figure, but every picture was slightly different than I remembered. In each one, the stones were arranged in new ways, sometimes fewer, sometimes more. In the last photo, the one I took just before touching the stone, the camera had caught a reflection in the lens, a face, my face, but the eyes were black and hollow. I destroyed the memory card and never went back. But I know the circle is still up there, waiting. And sometimes, when I walk near stone walls or see old gravestones, I feel that same humming deep in my jaw, a warning I'll carry with me until I'm no longer counted among the living. Story 10. They say the mountains remember. I never believed it until the summer of 1999, when I went looking for my missing brother and found something I still cannot explain. My brother, Jacob, was the wild one in our family, always chasing ghosts, legends, old stories passed down by the elders in our town near Wise, Virginia. He had a way of making the mountains feel alive, like they were part of him. Said he was going to explore the old coal mine tunnels near Stone Mountain. said he was going to find proof that the stories about the mine being haunted were real. He never came back. The search parties found nothing. No footprints, no belongings, no sign he had even been there. Only a broken lantern found near the mouth of the main tunnel. My parents were devastated. I packed a backpack with supplies and left before dawn, heading toward Stone Mountain. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of pine and damp earth. The forest there is dense. Old trees crowd together like they're whispering secrets to each other. The trail was overgrown, nearly swallowed by vines and moss, but I pressed on. As I neared the mine entrance, I felt something change. The birds stopped singing. The wind died. The silence was so deep I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. The ground underfoot felt soft, almost spongy, like it had been disturbed recently. I found the lantern first. Broken glass scattered like shards of ice, and the metal frame twisted but still warm. No answer. I stepped inside the mine. The air was cold, heavy, and smelled of earth and rust. My flashlight cut through the darkness, but barely reached past 10 feet. The walls were slick with moisture, and the tunnel floor was uneven, littered with loose rocks. I heard a faint dripping sound, and my own breathing. I followed the main tunnel deeper until it split into 3 paths. A crude sign hung on a wooden post, half-rotted. One arrow pointed left, labeled Old Shaft. Another pointed right, Lower Drift. The third pointed straight ahead with the word Chamber scratched in. I chose the chamber. The passage narrowed and descended steeply. My boots slipped on loose gravel, and the air grew colder with every step. The walls here had strange markings, deep grooves carved into the stone in spirals and zigzags. I pressed onward until I reached a large cavern. I dropped my pack and ran my hands over the pile, desperate for answers. That's when I heard a whisper, soft, like a breath, across my neck. I spun around. Nothing. I called his name again. The whisper answered. Help me. I fell to my knees, shaking, my flashlight flickering. The air thickened, and shadows seemed to pulse in the corners of the cavern. Suddenly, the ground beneath me trembled. A low rumble filled the chamber, growing louder until rocks began to fall from the ceiling. I scrambled to my feet and ran back the way I came. The tunnel behind me collapsed, trapping me inside. Panic surged through my veins as I searched for another way out. I found a narrow crawl space leading sideways. The air here was stale and suffocating. I squeezed through, my clothes snagging on sharp rocks, my hands bleeding. After what felt like hours, I emerged into a narrow vertical shaft. A ladder was fixed to the wall, rusted but intact. I climbed slowly, the metal groaning under my weight. At the top was a small door carved into the mountainside. I pushed it open and tumbled out into the daylight. I lay there gasping, the sun burning my eyes. Behind me, the mountain was silent once again. When I looked back, the door was gone, just stone and moss where it had been. I never told anyone what I saw inside that cavern. They'd say I was crazy or that the mountain got to me. But I know the truth. The mountain remembers. It holds them all, the lost, the broken, the forgotten, and now it holds me.